Conservation Director. Sorry, it just interrupted me. Conservation Director at Landmark Conservancy. Rick will provide a broad overview of land trust information with emphasis on Landmark's history and mission, including conservation programs, geography, recent projects, and conservation priorities. Rick is a native of central Wisconsin and a graduate of UW-Stevens Point. He has worked throughout the Midwest, Maine, and Kentucky in land management, restoration, and protection before joining the land trust staff in 2002. Rick leads the conservation team from Landmark's Menominee office. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everybody. How long do you all have today? About an hour or so?
Yeah, about an hour.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to plan on rolling through my PowerPoint presentation probably in 30 minutes, maybe a little more, and then offer you all the opportunity for questions. Unless you want to interrupt me as we go along, that's fine with me too. If something is urgent or pressing to shout out, feel free. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Thumbs up. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. It looks like we've got about 9 or so of us, and maybe people will trickle along as I'm talking. So as Cheryl said, I'm going to give kind of Land Trust 101, and obviously I'm going to draw upon my experience here at Landmark Conservancy. In the next half hour or so, I'll cover, what is a land trust conservancy or a conservancy, because we get that question a lot. Who we are and how we got here, where we work, what we do, how we select the conservation projects that we work on, some recent projects and accomplishments we've been involved with, especially locally, and how folks can get involved. So I get a lot of calls here at the office with people who will start a conversation with, I want to start a land trust, or I want to start a conservancy, or I want to support a land trust. And I always have to step back that conversation with folks by telling them that a land trust or a conservancy is technically the name of the nonprofit organization that works with landowners to conserve land. Not to be confused with conservation easements, or not to be confused with nature preserves, which can also be called conservancies and things of that nature. But when we say a land trust or a conservancy, we're speaking about the organization itself, not about the different tools or the different outcomes that we pursue. So the next thing I'm going to throw out there is just, why should I care? The fact that you're all here today tells me you care, but I'm not in a place to say why. And, people care for various reasons, and I'm thankful for that. We care about elephants in Africa. We care about clean water. We care because we want to leave a legacy for our kids or our grandkids. We care because we care about climate change and what the effects might be on species. We care because we want local places to hike and recreate. There's a whole slew of land-related reasons why we care. And so again, I'm not going to point out why, but just thankful for the fact that so many people do care, or we wouldn't be in the business we are. Okay, a brief history of land trusts. So land trusts have been around for a long time. Started more or less on both of the coasts, as a lot of new trends do, especially before the internet, and then trickled its way into the Midwest, maybe about 40 years ago or so. As you can see, the popularity of nonprofit organization conservation groups has grown over the last 100 years, and now there's about 1,700, my number might be off because this is an older slide, 1,700 land trusts that work in all 50 states, and about 42 or maybe as many as 45 work in Wisconsin. So there's lots of land trusts, and they vary dramatically. There's states like California and New York have over 100. And within those states, there's a dramatic, a lot of variability amongst the organizations, from all volunteer organizations to statewide groups that cover, vast geographies. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I think states like North Dakota and maybe to a lesser extent South Dakota don't really have local land trusts that work there, but are served by larger organizations like the Conservation Fund or Ducks Unlimited or Pheasants Forever, who can serve that role. Here in Wisconsin, again, we have 42, so we're kind of in the middle. By land trust standards, I think Landmark is one of the larger organizations in the state. There's a handful of other ones that have similar staff sizes as we do, about 5 to 10 individuals. And then there's certainly a handful that have that are all volunteer and are just governed by a board of directors with no staff. In Wisconsin, we are members of Gathering Waters. So Gathering Waters is not technically a land trust because they don't literally protect land, but they serve a really important role in being kind of a clearinghouse for information of us, enhancing our capacity to do our work, working on some statewide legislative issues like the Knowles-Nelson Stewardship Program. And so they serve as kind of an umbrella group for all the land trusts in the state. At the national level, we're also members of the Land Trust Alliance, which is over 1,000 land trusts, again, working on similar interests to boost our capacity. They sometimes grant and re-grant funds to us that they can obtain from larger funders, and they work on national legislative issues. So we're thankful to have both those organizations to help serve that role, especially for newer staff members, as a place where they can learn and gain information. So who is Landmark Conservancy? I like to say that we're a new land trust with old bones. We've been around now for Landmark's, I think, coming up on its 4th year this spring. But we were formed from, as you can see my little chart here, starting out with Wisconsin Farmland Conservancy, which was a statewide environmental and agricultural advocacy group working out of Menominee back in 1988. Wisconsin Farmland Conservancy ultimately morphed into West Wisconsin Land Trust, which started doing more of the typical land trust work of protecting land that we're familiar with. Along the way, West Wisconsin took on the organizational assets of a very small land trust, Upper St. Croix. And then finally, about 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago, after 2 years of work, West Wisconsin Land Trust merged with another regional organization, Bayfield Regional Conservancy, to form Landmark in 2018. Last year, after another couple years of discussion, Landmark took on the organizational assets of Cedar Waters Regional Land Trust, which was another all-volunteer organization that was headquartered in the Hayward area. So as you can see, it's not like we were born yesterday, but literally our name has only been out there for about 3 to 4 years, and the work has been going on for, if you added up each of these organizations, for probably 100 years total. We're governed by a board of directors. I think there's 15 people or so now that live and serve probably in the geography of Northwest Wisconsin, which I'll get to in a moment. We have a pretty good board, in my opinion. They're a great board. We have bankers, we have teachers, we have environmental educators, we have biologists, we have corporate executives, we've got plant managers, a whole slew of people that bring sort of the diversity of interests and passion and resources to govern our organization. Our staff right now is 10, which has grown dramatically. I mean, for our size, we've added a few positions here in the past couple of years and brought us up to where we really need to be. When you're a staff of 3 or 4 or 5 trying to do the work we do, you always feel like you're swimming and trying to get your head above water. And it really takes bringing on a couple of extra bodies that can take on the workload. And then you really start feeling like not only can you enjoy your job more, but you can get more done. So the fun part, where we work. Landmark works in that big, beautiful area we call Northwest Wisconsin. I think we say we cover about a 20 county area. As you can see, there's a few counties where we don't have a lot of activity, Taylor, Clark, and parts of Jackson. So it's not necessarily the entirety of those 20 counties, but we work very actively in probably about 15 or 16 with lesser activity in some of those south and east counties. The dot map there just illustrates conservation projects that we've had through all our names and things we've had over the years, both West Wisconsin, Bayfield Conservancy, and then most recently Landmark, illustrated by those projects that have some component of public access and those that are entirely private. So what do we do? Well, in a nutshell, we work with landowners and other partners to conserve land. And we do so through conservation easements, acquisitions where we acquire fee title interest to land, and also through donations of property. We, in some cases, steward the land that we acquire. Sometimes we will pass that on to another owner, a local unit of government, the Department of Natural Resources, a county government, and things of that nature. We also do outreach and education and have realized that in order for us to be successful, we can't protect enough land. We can't steward enough land to make a difference. We have to reach people. And that's people of all ages. It's folks of relatively our ages, middle to older, but also kids, teens, college kids, young adults, young families. If we're really going to make a difference in not only caring for the land we have to reach people. So we've really started to emphasize the community engagement and outreach in our work. And we also dabble in restoration and stewardship of trails. And we've got a couple of very active trail projects, particularly up in the Bayfield area right now, where we're investing a lot of resources. So I'll dive in just a little deeper on what we call our core conservation programs, which are land protection, conservation, easement stewardship, and then land ownership. Land protection is pretty easy. It's what we consider, easy to define, I should say. It's what we consider the tools we use to literally acquire and protect land. And those would be conservation easements, primarily with private landowners, vetting and accepting donations of land, acquiring land where we have to raise dollars to do so, and then obviously a bargain purchase, which is just acquiring land for less than the appraised value. All of that collectively is what we call or refer to as land protection. For everything we own, and that would include our interests in private conservation easements, or the land we own has to be stewarded. For the land we own, we have to post signage. We have to determine if there are trails and parking that are going to be permitted, if we're going to do restoration or take care of exotic invasive species, and deal with the host of neighbor and infraction issues that can occur with land management. For our conservation easement stewardship, similarly, we have to worry about the terms of the easement and have to monitor compliance annually. And I'll talk a little bit about that and more about that in a minute. Obviously, not all of us here in the office are working on land protection and land stewardship. We have about half our organization devoted to community engagement, to advancement, or raising the funds necessary to sustain the organization. And all of this work comes with a lot of administration and isn't done in a box, but in cooperation with a lot of different partners, both public and private. So I can't underscore, we're not all here protecting land and stewarding land. We have a lot of work and a lot of time devoted to making sure our organization remains healthy and visible. So I mentioned conservation easement stewardships. A huge part of our protected land portfolio consists of over 200 conservation easements covering over 25,000 acres. I think we added probably close to another 1,500 to 2,000 since I made this slide. So we're creeping up for sure on our conservation easement acreage. What I wanted to illustrate with this slide, and I could go on for probably half a day about this, is that all of these conservation easements and all of these acres have to be not only monitored annually for compliance, but we have to steward what I call transitions between the individual, or let's say mom and dad, who placed the conservation easement on the property, and everybody that comes after them. And it could be their kids who might be just as awesome as mom and dad, but it could be someone entirely different who maybe is not so thrilled about the conservation easement. And so a lot of what we do too is making sure those properties and those individuals stay in compliance with the terms of the easement, which gets more challenging over time as they transfer. For the land that we own, again, I think everybody has visited parks and nature preserves, and the sites we have are in some ways no different. Some of them have a lot of infrastructure on them, stairs, trails, parking, signage, kiosks, things like that. And some of them are places where, though they may be open to the public, there really isn't a lot of infrastructure for hiking. They're places to go hunting or place to wander at your will, but without a lot of organized trails and so forth. We have about 2,500 acres that we own over our 20 county areas. A few of those are larger sites, and some of them are little tiny places, which I'll talk about later. That might be only a handful of acres. We also do some restoration and habitat work on those properties, and in some cases that might include timber harvests, which comes as a surprise to people. But some of these properties were enrolled in programs like the Managed Forest Law prior to our acquisition, and so we're not immune to the terms of those contracts and have to implement those as well, which can be a great source of revenue. And then obviously all the host of administration that comes along with the work that we do takes a tremendous amount of time. Who do we work with? I won't I won't read these off verbatim off the screen, but as you can see, we work with people and groups, and that includes public and private. And I'm sure the list goes on here. I can think of a lot of fish and game organizations that we've worked with, both large and small. Everybody I think that you can imagine us working with, we have worked with at one time or another. Businesses, nonprofits, lake groups, citizens groups, and many, 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 many individuals. So a popular question that always pops up is, where do we get our money? And this is our unaudited financial overview from our fiscal year that ended last June. I say unaudited because our third-party financial audit is underway as we speak. That started a few weeks ago, and they'll be making their office visit next week. So certain individuals here in the office are scrambling around to find the host of documents that our auditors will be looking for. We've got a pretty diverse income stream, and I'm going to jump ahead here to a slide that I think won't be as number heavy as this, but it kind of shows where our money comes from. A lot of our money, I think most of it, comes from member and donor support. This could be folks that write out a check for $50 a year or $20 a year, or folks that write a check for $20,000 a year. There's a lot of variability between individuals that support our work. We receive a few foundation grants, and then there's obviously public grants like the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program, Wisconsin Coastal Management Program, North American Wetlands Conservation Act. Big public grants that typically don't help us keep the lights on in the office, but will literally go to acquiring land. And it takes both. It really takes grants that help us keep the lights on and pay me something to live on, but also takes large public grants like Knowles Nelson to help us acquire land. We also receive bequests and planned gifts, some of which we know about because people have disclosed their intentions to us, and some come as a surprise, where somebody has placed us in their will, passed on, and we find about it as their estate matters are being resolved. There's management income. I mentioned timber revenue a few minutes ago, and the sale of property in situations where we're able to do that. And then we have a handful of endowments that are set up. Some of those are broad to cover all of our stewardship work of the lands and easements that we hold. And we call that our Stewardship and Legal Defense Fund. And that's invested with 3 different community foundations, St. Croix, Dunn County, and Duluth Superior. And then we also have 2 project-specific endowments for the Mary Fitz Trust, invested with the Eau Claire Community Foundation, and a Love Lake endowment that rests with the Natural Resource Foundation of Wisconsin. So it's really great that we can partner with a wide variety of community foundations. And that not only helps keep those organizations strong, but they realize the value of our work, and it keeps us visible as they work with, donors and peoples in their community who might have an interest in supporting us in other ways. So with over 1,000 or 1,500 land trusts in the country and 45 or so in Wisconsin, you might seem like protecting land is the Wild West. And some days it does, but we have a pretty methodical way, not only in-house, but in the land trust community on how we conduct business. And sometimes it slows us down. I know it slows us down, and that's okay because it keeps us all on the correct path to doing business in an ethical manner. We call these land trust standards and practices. Back in, I think, 1989, the Land Trust Alliance, which is that national umbrella group of ours, came up with standards and practices to help land trusts do their work. And everybody signed on. It was no big deal. But along the way, they realized that as they updated standards and practices, they wanted to make sure that people had the ability to adhere to them. Standards and practices are divided into governance, finance, transactions, and stewardship. Governance and finance are really just, how to govern a nonprofit organization, whether you're feeding kids or whether you're protecting land. But the transaction and stewardship components really deal with the work of land trusts that we do. And then more recently, I said S&Ps came out in 1989, probably about 12, 13 years ago. The Land Trust Alliance launched a separate accreditation commission to really look in at each organization that wanted to apply and offer that third-party accreditation status. So we pursued that. I think West Wisconsin pursued that about 8 years ago. Bayfield Conservancy pursued it 10 years ago. This year we're up for reaccreditation. So again, here in about 3 or 4 months after our financial audit's over, we'll be compiling documents for that reaccreditation, which again is a really good way to make sure we're doing business not only consistently with other organizations, but in an ethical manner. So how best to advance our conservation vision? These are just a few words that I threw on here on things that we work on or think about as we're trying to decide where to protect land. We want our work to be targeted, not just random acts of conservation thrown across the landscape. We want to use the right tools in the right place, whether that be a conservation easement, whether that be acquiring land, or whether that be working with another public partner like the Department of Natural Resources or county government. We want to leverage the community partnerships that we have, both with organizations, individuals. We definitely want to stress climate resiliency in our work and make sure we have the ability to make a difference on where we protect land to make sure we get the biggest bang for the buck. Again, rather than random conservation acts, we want to create complexes to the extent we can. We want those lands to emphasize both the ecological attributes, but also recreation. And you want to apply the science and local knowledge that's available to us. So with climate resiliency being such an emphasis, and you can't watch the news these days without hearing about it, Landmark really wanted to take a look at our big 20 county area and where we should be doing what we call strategic land protection, opposed to the opportunistic land protection that can pop up when the phone rings. And we worked closely with the Nature Conservancy to develop our map. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this coming up here in a few slides. But we came up with what we call our focus areas for climate resiliency. These are some of, according to the scientists at TNC, with the Nature Conservancy, areas in the state which have the greatest potential to harbor biodiversity as our climate changes. There are others, and I don't want to miss that point. There are other areas, but we elected to not include them on our map because they're sufficiently protected. An example would be, I'm going to drag my cursor here. in South and West Douglas County. It's an area called the Northwest Lowlands. Tremendously diverse area. It has a lot of potential to harbor climate resilient lands, but it's pretty much all county forest, and there's not a lot of opportunity for us to work there, and we were considering it sufficiently protected. So we're obviously not going to invest a lot of time doing outreach in those areas or looking for projects in those areas. When they pop up, we'll consider that an opportunity. But the areas you see shaded here would be those areas where if we have an opportunity or a partner, we will emphasize through outreach and other means strategic land protection. So the Nature Conservancy has a platform called Conserving Nature State. And the central premise behind that is that certain areas will naturally harbor high levels of diversity. Over time, as our climate continues to change, those areas and the species that inhabit them will change. But because of their geophysical setting, diversity will remain high. I'm going to touch on that in the next 4 slides on what kind of creates that highly diverse and highly resilient landscape through resiliency, connectedness, flow, and diversity. I'm going to keep this pretty light without diving too deep into the science, but hopefully the next couple slides will illustrate what makes a climate resilient landscape or a climate resilient project. Some of these are no-brainers. On the left side of the screen, you see a wetland that's surrounded by forest. So the wetland here shows up as dark green. It's surrounded by forest. And then again, on the perimeters of that, you see agricultural land. The photos on the right illustrate a cornfield surrounded by cornfield. Now, everybody knows which site has more ecological diversity. And so the capacity of a site to maintain that diversity as the climate changes is going to be greater in the wetland, which has dry areas, wet areas, a mosaic of different natural communities, versus if you're a critter living on the edge of a cornfield, you got nowhere to go. And you're just naturally not going to have a place to escape as the climate changes if your biological needs dictate that. Connectedness, again, if you have a contiguous habitat, such as a forest or a wetland or a prairie, and there aren't a lot of breaks in that habitat by highways, through agricultural fields, homes, cities, etc., you have a high degree of connectedness. So these things are all things that the Nature Conservancy scored in their database statewide or nationwide, excuse me, and have it available to land trusts and worked with us to create our climate resilient areas. Flow, which is a little bit related to connectedness, shows that as species move from left to right, north to south, whatever, sometimes there's pinch points on the way. And an example might be on this stream corridor where you see the agricultural fields getting really close to the stream. That would be an example of a constrained corridor versus a diffuse area where species that are attempting to move for one reason or another have the ability to move over a broader area. And then the last one is just habitat diversity. And I think a good example of this would be a property that has a hill with a north slope and a south slope. Obviously, the north slope is going to be cooler than the south slope. The bottom of the slope generally moister than the top of the slope. And so if you have all of those in a relatively small area, as the climate changes, if a species needs to get cooler, wetter, drier, what have you, they're able to move in a relatively easy way for a short distance to find their life requirements. And so again, you know, a really flat cornfield, little diversity, little opportunity for variability versus a property that has, say, exposed rock, different moisture regimes, different aspects, and the ability of species to find their niche, even as the climate changes. Before I go on, I just want to contrast the strategic land protection of ecologically important resources. And I want to contrast that with what we call community resources. Because sometimes, we could protect the most critically imperiled, highly diverse, tons of biodiversity landscapes and wherever they be. And maybe not a lot of people will go there, and that's okay because they're harbingers of diversity. But there's also community needs. And we try to balance our work between conserving those ecologically important resources, but also balancing that with the community needs and community resources across our area. I took a environmental ethics course when I was going to school a long time ago. And one of the take-home points that I remember to this day, and this is probably 20, I don't know how many, 30 years ago or so, was that we had, 15, 20 students in the class, and we went around and said where we gained our environmental or conservation philosophy from, or ethics. And nobody gained them in cool places like the Boundary Waters Canoe area or Yellowstone or the vast wilderness areas in the desert Southwest. Pretty much everybody in the class gained their conservation ethic by playing in degraded woodlots behind their school, in vacant lots behind their house, in a field across from their parents' subdivision, and places like that. And here we were, all kids going to school, pursuing, careers in ecological management and things like that. And so, I think it's an important thing to take home. So as Landmark continues to try to stress the importance of protecting ecological areas, that we keep an open ear to our constituents and members and donors and communities on needs that are right in our backyard. Is it better to protect 200 acres in the middle of nowhere that's got a ton of biodiversity? Or is it better to protect 20 acres behind the middle school? I think we could debate that, but these are the kind of questions that we sometimes grapple with. When we look at different community project considerations, and this really is for all projects I think that we work on, not just community, we're looking at land and acreage, we're looking at the cost and sources of funding, we're looking at our own staff capacity, we're looking at the potential for partners or partnerships, what the community needs might be, what the community impact might be to the property. We're looking at future ownership and management. Obviously, we're looking to kill two birds with one stone and looking for ecological benefits. And we're looking to see the potential for people in those communities to gain a connection to that land. I hope we're always going to maintain a balance between what we call the community projects versus the ecological projects. And so far, we've been able to do that. So projects trickle into our office in a variety of ways. They come via email. They literally sometimes walk in the door. They come via letter. They come via our website. They come from our project partners and constituents that are across our area. And it's up to our conservation staff to sort of gather the information. And the first way we do that is typically, gathering what information we can online or from the individuals. It might include a site visit. And then we vet it as a team and try to think which projects we should try to advance versus which ones we should try to pass on. After that, it goes to our conservation committee, which is a subset of our board, and then ultimately goes to our full board of directors before we begin to execute. What we're trying to do is just make sure we get the most bang for our buck and use our resources most effectively. We realize we can't do it all. And so we recognize that, and I think have a hard time sometimes saying no to people. But when a project comes up that's, several acres, and we're faced with, 20 other opportunities that we all agree are much, much better, we just have to tell people no and try to offer them other things they can do to advance conservation in their own way. I'm going to show you some hopefully pretty pictures of some fun local projects some of you probably have visited or maybe are aware of. This little property here, we work with the town of Union. It's not in Dunn County. It's on the Dunn-Eau Claire County line, literally, just outside of Eau Claire. And we have a very progressive township over there that owned property and wanted to see permanently protected and also wanted to acquire more property. So we worked with them to create about 120-acre area, which the town now maintains with hiking trails that have perched sand dunes 200 feet above the Chippewa River, as well as protects some cultural resources that are located on site. 10 Mile Creek Wetland Management District is just outside New Richmond, so not too far from Menominee or Dunn County. And I thought this was a good example of how we worked with the feds, with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but also a whole host of local fish and game organizations, including the local Pheasants Forever chapter and 3 different rod and gun clubs. We acquired 120 acres there over 2 transactions, and then worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife to plant prairie on the property before turning the property over to them. This is just north of Menominee between Lake Menomin and Tanner. This is the Red Cedar Cut-off, which I worked on, I guess probably about 10 or 12 years ago or so. You can see all the logos on the sign illustrating all the different local partners that contributed to the acquisition of the Red Cedar Cut-off property in memory of Jim Forster. Many of you probably remember Jim as our county conservationist back then.
Hey, do I see Landmark?
You see one of our former organizations, West Wisconsin.
Another sign added to the list.
Yep. The Keil Birch Creek Preserve is literally right down the street from the high school, just about in town, but it's actually in the township. This is my daughter about, I don't know, a long time ago, which has a number of little waterfalls on the property. And again, was a spectacular community project right here in Menominee. A more recent project, and I could turn it over to Kathy on the call today to talk about this, the Colfax Red Cedar Preserve and Recreation Area, which was a fantastic outcome of the old Dunn County gravel pit just outside of Colfax with, I can't remember how much frontage on the Red Cedar River and about 150 acres. And Kathy and company are doing a great job in sharing that recreational and ecological resource with the community.
And we did transition that ownership, right? Yeah, that's the town. Yeah, cool.
This colorful slide shows the Russian Slough project, orange being state land, yellow being county land, green being the alliance of Dunn County conservation groups, and then red being the last little piece of the puzzle there that Landmark acquired a few years ago. Most of it being pretty wet, but a lot of the acreage, particularly to the east, is much drier. And this is on the Red Cedar, just above Lake Tanner, downstream from the Colfax Preserve. I don't think there's anybody that hasn't been to the Devil's Punchbowl. You know, this is a long-standing landmark here in the Menominee area. My sister-in-law was a Stout student 50 years ago or so, 49 or 50 years ago, and she went to the Devil's Punchbowl back then. So it gets just a tremendous amount of use. We had a campaign last year to raise funds to build the stairway, and my coworker Andrew was actually on the phone with our hopeful contractor this morning in planning for that, the construction of that stairway this summer. I don't think every school group that visits is as large as the one in the bottom here, but if even a fraction of those kids turn out to be environmental advocates and conservation voters and belief in our mission and belief in what we're doing, there's hope, because that place gets a tremendous amount of use from all age groups. And I think this is my final slide and probably our most recent project accomplishment, which is the acquisition of the piece of the what people call the Tyrone property in southern Dunn County on the Chippewa River. Obviously, I think if there's local folks on the call today, and I believe there is, this was slated to be a nuclear power plant 40 some years ago. and had its ups and downs over the year as Northern States Power made decisions on what to do with the property. The Department of Natural Resources was able to scoop up about 1,000 acres of it 3 to 4 years ago. And then we worked cooperatively with the department and were able to acquire about 360 acres just before Christmas a few weeks ago. So we're thrilled to be able to add that piece to the puzzle in what is probably one of the most diverse areas of Wisconsin.
Say, Rick, is that rose-colored stretch, is that the 324 acres?
You bet. That's it.
Okay. Yep, thanks. Yep, thanks.
Now I'm going to talk just a few minutes about protecting private land with conservation easements, and then I'm going to wrap up by having a few words about what folks can do to help this effort, and then turn it over to the group for questions. I think I'm on track here so far. So what a conservation easement is, we get a lot of questions on this, is a permanent agreement that landowners do with a land trust to place restrictions on the use of their property to protect what's important. Issues, and these are some of the more common ones, are forestry, agriculture, the big two, residential development and subdivision, and then how to protect ecologically significant areas through shoreline buffers, other reserved rights they may have to recreate and so forth, and whether there's any level of public access. So one conservation easement can differ dramatically from another depending on the land. If you have a forested property versus an agricultural or a wetland property, the terms are going to be dramatically different. The benefits, the biggest one is underlined on the top there, is permanent conservation, but it can also be important for the landowners for income tax incentives. The property can stay in private ownership. They can address various situations and rights that are tailored to the owner and their family members. But again, I always want to say that the most important reason to protect land is for conservation. Even though it can help keep peace in the family and help divest property to heirs and so forth, conservation is number one. And here's just a few things of what a conservation easement is not. It's not a tool to decrease property taxes. We get that question a lot. And if the answer to this was yes, my phone would ring off the hook. But thus far, Wisconsin does not offer a decrease in property taxes because we have what's called a use value assessment. So property is put into buckets by the assessors based on its use, whether it's productive forest, whether it's agricultural, whether it's residential, whether it's wasteland, which I hate to use that term for wetlands. Cheryl could probably, being a clerk, could probably fill me in on a few more of those categories. Commercial, I think, is one. And a conservation easement can cover all those things. So assessors aren't really sure where to put them, so they have to go back to their use value assessment. A conservation easement is not necessarily an exclusion of management. Properties can be management through in a number of ways: restoration, timber harvest, agriculture. It doesn't mean they're no touch. It doesn't also mean that there is an allowance for public access or hunting. The vast majority of our easements do not have a public access component to them. I would say probably about a couple dozen of them do have a public access component, but the majority do not. They're not an exhaustive list of peculiar restrictions, although people have peculiar desires and what they want to see protected, and we have to ask ourselves what's important and do we have the ability to steward it. Lastly, a conservation easement isn't free. It takes dollars to execute, and it definitely takes dollars for us to perpetually steward them over the long term. And here's just a couple examples of a couple easements, couple conservation easements that we did over the last couple of years. Here's a large one in northern Dunn County, a mix of wetland and forest. It's kind of on the cusp of the Bear Lake Moraine, which is a name I gave it. So you find that hummocky post-glacial resources there, kind of like you find in northern Chippewa County. sedge meadows, beavers ponds, and so forth. And then a project that we closed just after Christmas, about 2 weeks ago, which is the Bacon Coulee conservation easement in Pierce County outside of Spring Valley, which is our largest conservation easement to date at just over 800 acres, and a mix of prairie grass, pasture, and forage, but also a really cool steep forested coulee and a Class 2 trout stream. So how do we measure the impact of our work? You know, we have an advancement department that talks about our work to sustain our membership, to get folks excited about conservation. And it can be really easy for us, even in my seat, as you're looking for opportunities and looking for grants, to dwell on the number of projects that you work on, that you accomplish, to dwell on the number of acres. You know, I just mentioned the largest easement we did at 800 acres. We can dwell on how much we spend on property, which is sometimes, you know, amazing when you look back at the cumulative effect of our acquisitions and protection efforts in the millions of dollars. You can look at the individual attributes like feet of shoreline, how much public use they get, what natural communities are present. These are all things that we can try to talk about. But the bottom line is the impact of all this protected land over time is priceless. You know, think back to that slide of the Devil's Punch Bowl a few minutes ago, where you saw 80 or 100 kids in the bottom of the punch bowl having fun, hopefully learning something, poking around, causing a little mischief, playing in the stream, and having that memory to take with them. Kids come with their families there and do the same thing. And so the degree that these properties are reaching people, and not only just protecting bunnies and trees and flowers and snails and slugs and moss and lichens, and you know, I could go on all day and listing them, the cumulative conservation impact of these areas and land protection in general is priceless. We try to talk about it, but we sometimes revert back to acres and dollars and projects, but really the conservation impact is priceless. In closing, you know, every situation is different. Every landowner is different and every piece of property is different, obviously. People have goals. We as an organization have goals. There's family matters to take care of. There's heirs who have interest or lack thereof. There's folks who want to create a legacy through the ownership of their property or through their resources. Land can create a tremendous amount of attachment. People can get so passionate about land, they can get angry about it, they can get happy, they can get sentimental, they can cry over it. But there's a tremendous amount of attachment. Which partners we might have that are interested? What is the income and wealth of the individual? Sometimes they didn't have a land problem or a wealth problem and need to get rid of some of that. It all boils down to decisions. And if there's one course I probably should have taken in college, which they didn't offer natural resources majors, was a psychology course, because I could probably use one when a lot of the folks that call here with their land problems. How can you support our work? I never miss the opportunity when I have a few folks on a Zoom call or in person to get involved where you live, to attend an event, to volunteer, consider a membership gift to Landmark, or consider Landmark in your estate planning. I think that is just a few ways you can support us, obviously, but also there's other ways to support conservation where you live. There's innumerable conservation groups and sportsmen's clubs, Dunn County Fish and Game, Pheasants Forever, Trout Unlimited, the Dunn County Alliance. There's the Sierra Club. There's different conservation programs folks can implement on their own lands. They can create rain gardens. They can plant CRP. There's local initiatives that people should be aware of and support to the degree they can, like the farmer-led councils, in trying to implement sustainable agricultural practices that'll help clean up our water quality and address climate change. Shop local, buy local where you can, and plant native. And obviously, vote. And I'm not going to go into how to vote, but I've got my opinions. And the fact that people get out and vote and stay informed on these conservation issues is critical. And then just stay informed, which is a good big part of what HEAT is doing. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. Thank you. I'm going to stop my screen share, if that's okay, Cheryl.
She may have been be off the line.
I kept talking to her like she was there and she's gone.
Yeah, Cheryl had to leave early. She had another commitment.
Are you in charge, Steve?
Well, I don't know if I'm in charge, but I will. I'll try to. I'll start it off with a question.
Sure.
My wife and I often take, we just hop in the car and we just follow back roads.
Yep.
Just kind of head out. And we have one of these gazetteer maps, and we'll look for county parks or just little remote areas. So I found it quite interesting of, would you say 209 properties, I think you said, and some of them have infrastructures, trails, et cetera.
Yep.
Do you have a map? And
Yes.
description of those, because I'd like to get one.
We have on our website a link to many of the properties that we've protected that have public access on them. I can send you a link, Steve.
Sure.
Otherwise, landmarkwi.org.
Yeah, that's great. The fact that, I guess, well, of course, the Devil's Punchbowl is.
That's got enough use.
but there's probably all kinds of them around these 20 counties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and quite a few just within an hour.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I also would like to share too, for folks to be aware that we actually see that there could be some strategic land protection still occurring here in Dunn County. And I think Rick brought that up with the climate prioritization. We actually have some really important targeted areas in this region with some important significance. So anyway, I just wanted folks to be aware that we work in 20 counties, 15 counties, however, it feels like all over, Rick, right? But more importantly, we know you're here loving Dunn County. And if there are some really important places that still need to get protected, we're all ears.
No. Your curve that you showed early in your slides, you had, I think it was like from 1950 until today. And it looked like it was pretty much a straight line slope of lands. What do you see? What is the projection for the coming decades? Do you have any idea? Is it going to increase or flatten out or continue as it is?
Lindsay, can you share what the Land Trust Alliance had as a target that they wanted for us acreage wise? I don't remember. There's some initiative, but I can't remember what.
So there's a national initiative by the Biden administration, the president of the United States. It's called 30 by 30. And what they're basically saying is 30% of lands, targeted lands, need to be protected in each state. And I think that's kind of, now you can go to some West states and they're all federally protected. So, take it all with a grain of salt, but that's what their approach was going to be, 30 by 30. And it's by
30%.
Or is it 30 million? It's either 30% or 30 million by 2030. But I also want to point out that there's no monies attached to any of this. So it was this great national rallying point with no money. But I do think, and the one thing I will say about land protection work, we take the long haul. I think we're going to, critically important land will be protected over the next 25 years. And the more targeted we are with those protections will be very important moving forward. That's the exciting part of our work, I think, personally. But I know this was a long presentation and I have to drop off. I have a 1 o'clock call. So I apologize to Steve, Sue, and Kathy, but you three might want to stay on and continue talking about our Monday work if you need to. But I apologize. I've got to go meet with a prospect board member. Thanks, Rick. You did a great job as always.
Hey,
Well, we do have a few minutes left. So if there are any other questions from anybody still with us, go ahead.
Yep, and you folks know where I live, so something pops up, give me a shout. I think the fact that like Lindsay said, the fact that our office is in Menominee, that's not that we put Dunn County or Menominee over everywhere else, but selfishly, if I get the opportunity, who wouldn't want to work close to home, right? I think that Tyrone acquisition is probably, in all the years I've worked there, the closest project to my house. So it's kind of exciting, Devil's Punchbowl is probably as the crow flies closer, but I gotta, go roundabout to get there. So.
No, very, very educational, Rick. Thank you very much for sharing and updating us all on what you're doing. I enjoyed the program, and I'm sure
Well, there's a lot to talk about, and any one of those things could be broken into another, couple of hours. So thanks for bearing with me.
This recording, was recorded, and I came in late. Will this be available on your website to listen to?
It will become available on this community by the weekend.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll send it
yeah.
out, to our members, to the link to Rick's presentation.
Okay, then I'm sure we'll put it on our website too.
Yeah, Ned, I see where you are with the Madeline Island Wilderness Preserve, and I'm glad you joined us. Thank you very much. Could you just take
Well, we used to have more of a relationship with the Bayfield Regional Conservancy. We would go across the water and have breakfast or lunch with them from time to time, and sometimes visit some of their projects. But quite frankly, we've kind of lost touch. It's a good idea for us to know what you all are up to and get some ideas. So I just decided to tap in this morning and listen to what's going on. And it's, as I say, it's not a bad idea to stay in touch with what others are doing in our area. Bayfield Regional Conservancy has done a lot on the Bayfield Peninsula.
Absolutely, Ned. Erica still has an office there, right in Bayfield. So,
Yeah.
give her a shout, go to our website, her email address is on there, or just give us a call.
Yeah, we should stop it. We should stop in there at some point.
you live on the island, Ned?
No, I live in Minneapolis. I have property on the island, and I'm the treasurer of the Wilderness Preserve. One of the things I liked when I was listening to this talk was when you're going for grants and so on, they really want to know what projects you've been up to and so on. And we have a list of projects, and that helps our membership be a part of us and get the island involved and so on and so forth. So I don't know, it's good to hear what other people are doing.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
We have these meetings. We're nothing but a group of volunteers.
Mhm.
And we're in Dunn County here. We've been kind of involved in the last little over 2 years, 2.5 maybe. And so you're always welcome to join us.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've got a link. I know the link to the website, so
Good,
I'll check from time to time.
good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Rick, for your presentation. And thanks everybody, and we will see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.